Okay, so if you're ready, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So thank you for coming to this session. So I'm Ayano, so the moderator of this session. The topic today is, so as already mentioned, so today's topic is how can we grow the life science startup ecosystem in Tokyo. And we will discuss with this topic with Mr. Marc Penzel, the founder and president of startup Genome, and Mr. Victor Mulas, a senior advisor of Cambridge Innovation Center. And today's topic is here. Today's agenda is here. So at first, I will briefly talk about the background of this session, and then Mark will present Tokyo and the state of the global startup ecosystem. And next, Victor introduced Tokyo's startup ecosystem more precisely. And based on this presentation, so we plan to discuss about the potential and the challenge of Tokyo's life science ecosystem and the solution for its evolution. At the end, we plan to take some questions from the floor, and if time allows. Okay, let's get started. So this is the introduction slide of mine. Okay, so I think that before starting a presentation from Mark and Victor, I would like to briefly introduce about the startup ecosystem of Tokyo and from the aspect of global startup ecosystem. This is a well-known report from Set of Genome, so Mark's report. And I think most of the people here should know this report. And you can see that Tokyo is ranked 12th in 2022. And there should be still two opinions about this program. So this might be higher, or this is still slow. This is still low. And I believe so Mark and Victor will explain about the Tokyo still has a potential to go higher. And many people, including governments, try to evolve Japan's startup ecosystem much more. But the question is, how can we do it? And also, most of the governments or stakeholders here are struggling to grow the startup ecosystem in Tokyo, especially in life science. So today's topic is life science. And life science is, as I mentioned, today's topic, but it is one of the areas of focus in Tokyo's startup ecosystem. Sorry. Sorry. So this is a life science ranking of life science startup ecosystem in Startup Genome report. So the reason why the Tokyo startup ecosystem, so life science is focusing on, is this is basically because the academic research and the research level in this area is still high. And Tokyo can be competitive in biotech or life science area by transferring academic knowledge to business. However, the ranking itself is still lower than general startup ecosystem ranking. Of course, the ranking is not everything, but it shows some aspect of startup ecosystem and the situation of Tokyo. But the government, especially Tokyo metropolitan government, try to manage programs to evolve Tokyo's life science ecosystem, and this is one of the major program supported by Tokyo metropolitan government. The program name is Blockbuster Tokyo. I think that most of you know, maybe hear this name before. This program is started in 2018, and at that time, this is one of the accelerator program to support biotech startup in Tokyo. And now after that, after the start of this program, so it's already 4 years past. And after 4 years, we have many acceleration program in Tokyo. And now the Tokyo Metropolitan Government renewed this Blockbuster Tokyo program from this year. And from this year, this Blockbuster Tokyo work as a platform for supporting startup ecosystem in Tokyo. And the Link-J and CRC Japan, CRC Tokyo, and Mitsubishi Research Institute work as the project promoter of Blockbuster Tokyo. Then, what do we do in this Blockbuster Tokyo? And this Blockbuster Tokyo, we try to build a community of life science startup ecosystem stakeholders, and also we try to support the implement program, which is essential. We try to support and implement the programs, which is essential to evolve Tokyo startup ecosystem, especially in life science industries. So like we plan to organize a career fair, and also we plan to support we would like to build the mentor or advisor pool for the using this Blockbuster Tokyo's program. But there are so many stuff we have to do to evolve the life science startup ecosystem in Tokyo. So this is our discussion topic today. And so I would like to some keynote presentation from Marc and Victor after me. So okay, let's move on to Marc's slides. So floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you in Tokyo today. I will give you a very short introduction about Startup Genome. We will then move on to some global findings, and then we will talk more about the Tokyo ecosystem in life sciences specifically. Whenever people ask me to introduce Startup Genome, I like to show this chart, because what it shows on the y-axis is the exit value that the global startup ecosystem has created during the last 2.5 years. And on the x-axis, you can see the cities that have contributed to that global exit value the most. And you will see that on the far left, there is San Francisco, and then it is followed by New York, London, Beijing, Boston, Tel Aviv. And then the curve becomes really, really flat. And what that means is that most regions in the world are currently not participating in the new economy and not creating successful startups. And really, the reason for Startup Genome is to flatten the curve and to come together as a global community and to make sure that every region around the world has the tools in order to build successful startups and startup ecosystems. During the last 10 years, we built a network of around 375 partner organizations and around 125 client organizations. It's important to understand that we're not only trying to learn and replicate the learnings from Silicon Valley or the learnings from Tel Aviv or New York, but it's really about coming together as a global community in order to understand what we can learn from each of others in all of our individual journeys in building startup ecosystems. What we're doing once a year is we're publishing an annual global startup ecosystem report that was mentioned already. We're looking at well over 3 million companies to do that research. We're looking at around 280 startup ecosystems at this point in time. And leading up to this year's report, for the last 10 years, we've surveyed around 90,000 startup executives around the world in order to get to the bottom of the founders and the startup executives' experience of growing their company. Due to this work, we're now considered the world's leading innovation policy advisory and research firm, working with 125 or so governments and quasi-government organizations. The role that we typically take is we provide a standardized assessment. We're then bringing in best practices from what we've seen in other ecosystems and other regions' work. And then we're bringing the community together to understand what are the right ingredients, what are the right policies and programs for your ecosystem at this point in time, so that we can take action together and really build a better ecosystem around the founders. I'm going to present just a few findings from the Global Startup Ecosystem Report 2022 before we look into Tokyo specifically. And I like this number because it shows that the startup revolution is no longer a small, vibrant sector, but it really is, with $6.4 trillion of value, higher than the GDP of most G7 countries. Startups during the last couple of years have literally disrupted major industries across all of the different areas of work and living that we can imagine. One important trend underneath that, and this is also what we will be discussing here today, is that startups are more and more characterized by deep technology. And here on this chart, you can see that the share of deep tech startups out of all of the startups in the world continues to increase. And here you see the percentage of deep tech deals and also the deep tech deal volume as a relative proportion to the overall amount of startups in the global startup ecosystem. So during the last 10 years, you see an increase of around 10%, deep tech becoming more and more important. When we look at deep tech, what we mean, for example, is artificial intelligence and big data. We're talking about advanced manufacturing and robotics, or AMR for short. We're talking about blockchain, we're talking about ag tech and new food, and we're not necessarily as much talking about advertising technology or digital media. The size of each of these circles represent the relative proportion of startups within the global startup ecosystem of each of these subsectors. And the difference between the turquoise and the dark blue circles basically mean how did these subsectors develop over the course of the last 3.5 years. And what you can see, we're looking at the development from the dark blue to the turquoise. You can see that on the y-axis, Series A growth during the last couple of years has slowed down across almost each of these sectors. And you're seeing that exits have grown for most of these subsectors during the last couple of years. And what this means is that we're now in this current macroeconomic environment perhaps starting to see a bit less of continued investments at an early stage, continue to see high inflation and values, but we're more and more seeing consolidation. And here, for example, by measure of exits taking shape and increasing across each of these subsectors. I mentioned that the global startup revolution is taking place and taking shape globally. This is one statistic that I find interesting. We see that there are right now already 113 regions in the world. And with regions, we mean metro areas, ecosystems at the city level, essentially, that have been capable of producing at least one unicorn. And when you look at 2013, we counted 4 ecosystems. Right now, we're at 113. So during the last couple of years, quite a tremendous development. When you look at where Japan comes into this picture, I think for all of us, we'd want to see better rates and more unicorns being formed in Tokyo and in Japan. If you compare that to China and the United States, perhaps this is not new to most of you. We're still lagging behind here in the ecosystem, and this is also what we want to be discussing in this conversation today. Once a year, we look at the startup ecosystem and try to map and to rank each of their performance. And as been mentioned before, Tokyo in the 2022 ranking came 12th, essentially dropping out of the top 10. And you can see its relative development during the last couple of years, with the growth recently slowing down. In 2019, it was ranked 41, and then quite a phenomenal rise up until 2021, essentially being part of the top 10. And now recently, and this is perhaps what we're seeing generally in the leading startup ecosystems in the world, the competition becomes more and more fierce. Being part of the top 5 is much more difficult. Being, top 3 is nearly impossible. So we're really nearing a point where it becomes very, very difficult for Tokyo to continue to grow its performance if it doesn't improve on some of the metrics that we will be looking at in the session. We're always trying to go deeper, and life sciences is a great example because you cannot compare traditional startups, SaaS startups, to those that are oftentimes born in subsectors like life sciences, right? You need a very different ecosystem. You're looking at very different types of companies with very different types of funding requirements and lab infrastructure requirements around them. So for around 1 year before publishing our first life sciences startup ecosystem report, we were essentially developing a new methodology to look at life sciences startup ecosystems. And of course, the ranking, when you look at the top 20, it's not fundamentally different. We're still seeing Silicon Valley at the top, for example. We're still seeing that New York, London, etc., play a leading role. But we're also seeing that smaller specialized ecosystems, such as the Research Triangle out of the United States, or Singapore, or Hartford, the United States, Bern, Geneva, for that matter, play a much bigger role in the life sciences ecosystem than if you compare startup ecosystems on broader terms. Here, Tokyo, unfortunately, is ranked 25th only However, it showed some increasing performance levels during the last couple of years, so on a positive trajectory, but still definitely a lot of room for improvement that we want to discuss. And just for your reference, when we at Startup Genome talk about life sciences, the subsector, we're looking at diagnosing, treating, and managing diseases and conditions, which then also includes startups in biotech, pharma, and medtech. And as I mentioned before, we've developed a slightly different methodology to rank startups and startup ecosystems to reflect and to accurately reflect on some of these specific requirements for life sciences ecosystems and startups. When we look at one of the key metrics for how Tokyo is currently not in the top 10, not in the top 5 for life sciences, one thing that we continue to find is that when you compare the traditional innovation ecosystem performance, and with this we mean patent output, we mean corporate infrastructure, R&D performance, when you map that against the startup ecosystem performance, which means the number of startups in life sciences, for example, the venture investment into life science, you see that Tokyo has all the ingredients in place, phenomenal traditional innovation ecosystem. But comparing it to London, for example, but also to San Diego, you see that the translation component, really converting that amazing innovation and research and development into startups, into commercially viable products and services, you see that Tokyo is lagging behind. Just wanted to highlight that on June 15th, we're releasing the new Global Startup Ecosystem Report with updated analysis and rankings, and we invite you all to check it out on startupgenome.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marc. I think this is great presentation before we starting discussion after Victor's presentation. So floor is yours, Victor.
Well, thank you very much. So after Marc's presentation, I'm going to do a deep dive into Tokyo startup ecosystem. So let's start with where he just left it, which is the science and technology performance. As you can see, Tokyo has a very strong science and technology cluster and performance. Actually, it has the #1 science and technology cluster per the WIPO, the World International IP Organization. And what they do here is measure the patent output and the publications output, and they look for quality, not just numbers. So there's a strong performance that happens constantly every year, at least for the last 10 years. And it's not only on the patent side, you can also see the R&D expenditure by, in general, in the economy. It's one of the highest per GDP in the world. So that combination gives us a very strong pillar of science and technology for deep tech and bio specifically. Now, in terms of startup funding and startup potential in the ecosystem, what you see is that when you look at numbers by themselves, and this is investment on startups, the VC investment or the startup funding in the case of Japan, when we look at the metro areas, Tokyo is still within the 20 top ones, but you can see here what is the difference and the gap in finance available for startups. So that speaks a little bit about what Marc was saying about the translation gap that we have between the science and then the potential of converting that science into startups. That is still not happening in terms of funding, and we will go into why. And you can see that the potential to grow is far greater, because when you look at VC investment or expenditure by GDP, it's very low compared to the ones we had in science, right? So the potential to invest more on the translation part is there. We are missing something, which is the translation component. So let's go into Tokyo by itself. And the first thing you can see is that Tokyo has the largest concentration in Japan of startup assets. It has like around 80% of the investment and 70% of the startups. And you can see here it's a map of the startups that was done by the World Bank in 2019. And you can start seeing where the concentration and the hubs are, with Tokyo leading, and then you have Kansai and Fukuoka as the other clusters, but they are much smaller in terms of size. When we look at the startups ecosystems, we look at connections and social networks. And this is a social network map of the startup ecosystem stakeholders in Tokyo. This is also part of the report from the World Bank, which I was one of the authors. And what you can see here, it's every dot is a startup ecosystem stakeholder, and the lines are the connections among them. And connections means investment, mentorship, accelerator program, or alumni of a university. So someone where you can pick the telephone and call, and they will receive you, right? And the size of the dots means how many of those connections you have. And it's a gravitational map, which means the more centered you are, the more network you have of secondary and tertiary connections. So that means more influence. And when we look at this in 2019, 2020, the Tokyo ecosystem was centered in financial institutions and universities that were looking at more traditional education. Usually in ecosystems it's the opposite. What you have at the centers are accelerators, are startup campuses, are VC investors or angels, big mentors. So that's a big gap here we have into what the startups want to do, the founders want to do, and the support they can get in terms of finance that it's catering to growth and not only to loan or just traditional financial returns that doesn't look into growth. And education that is also catering into developing more entrepreneurship. And that was not happening in Japan. Now, the good news is that it's changing. And since 2019, you have actors like CIC or Plug and Play or other accelerators, Techstars and 500 startups that are coming to the ecosystem. The universities are also changing into more entrepreneurial education. So that's the good news. And we hope that this starts changing and evolving more naturally, because when you compare internationally, this is the picture you get. And this is the New York ecosystem social map, very similar to the one I talked about Tokyo, and the one in Tokyo. These are at the scale, so you can see the difference in growth of the ecosystems. And the difference in color, the purple versus the yellow, what means is actors that are in purple are specialized on supporting startups. That means their only mission is for startups to exist and to grow. Those are venture capital investors. They only think about the startups as a growth outcome, accelerators, boot camps, and so on. Right, the startup campuses and all those ones. Versus the yellow. The yellow are traditional economic players, a standard bank. They give you a loan, and they don't care if you grow or not. You just pay the loan. That's fine. Or a consulting firm. They just care about the services. They don't care about you growing. They don't have a stake on you, an equity. So what you see is in ecosystems that are more successful, most of the ecosystem is catering to startups and startup growth. All the incentives are aligned. In Tokyo, that wasn't the case in 2019, and what we are seeing is the change of that. That's good news, but still, there is growth to happen. Now, when you see international connectivity, this is a similar map that what you saw in the ecosystem, but this is among different hubs, leading hubs around the world. And this is investment connectivity. That means an investment from one ecosystem went to the other, to a startup in another ecosystem, or vice versa. And this is about deep tech, particularly. And it covers AI, robotics, space tech, and quantum computing. And what you see is that Tokyo is connected, that is good, and it's connected with global clusters like San Francisco, New York, and Boston, but it could have much more connection, given the potential that it has on science and technology. So the question is, how do you take advantage of that existing connectivity and grow it? And particularly grow it in receiving also investment, because most of the connections right now is giving investment to others. So what we are seeing now in Tokyo is that the startup funding, the funding from VCs and other entities in startups is growing. And you can see that chart that's from initial, how it's constantly growing. But interestingly enough, if you compare with other hubs in Asia, Tokyo startup investment is very steady. You look at around 2020, during the crisis of the pandemic, it decreased a little bit, but it wasn't too much compared to others. And in 2022, it decreased a little bit with the crisis that we're having, but it's not too much. So if you think about it, it's following a very, very steady line. Only Shenzhen is the only one that is following that line. All the others go up and down, and they really go down when the crisis hit. So what this tells us is it seems there is a growing trend that is happening that is sustained by fundamentals, not by the global sentiment of investment in startups that happen. And that is good. That seems you have a fundamental here that can be leveraged more. Let's dip into deep tech startups. You saw the average was around 30% globally that Marc presented. what we have in Japan is 35%, but this only includes hard tech within the deep tech. It doesn't include AI or other deep techs that were included in March 1. So if you go to that, you probably have 50%. And you can see that it's growing steadily, the funding on hard tech in Japan with the VC of the investment. It grows at the same pace almost. It means it's one of the pillars and one of the fundamentals. So that gives us the trend that the fundamental is lying in this hard science and technology startup potential. When we look at the source of funding, what we are seeing is you have specialized funding from VCs, independent VCs and angels, and international VCs that is coming. But the interesting thing is that it's growing. And even though the ecosystem right now is dominated by corporations and financial institutions in terms of funding, the investment that is coming from abroad and the independent VCs that are emerging is growing at a pace of 4.2 and 7.8. So that's very good because it means you are attracting more of those independent VCs that cater about growth, and they're also transforming the behavior of the domestic corporations and the CVCs into more growth-led focus. Now, one of the other trends we are seeing is because Japan ecosystem actors, particularly funding, was not catering for startup growth, was more about the strategic returns, like corporations or financial institutions that look in finance. The funding gap that we had in each of the series was very wide, but that is shortening. What do I mean by funding gap? That means that in each of the series that a startup takes, and you have the value of the series, the international value standard that we usually use in the series A, B, C, etc., that you have below, the amount that is paid in Japan by investors, a startup in each of the series, is pretty much on average for the initial stages, seed, A, and B. But when you go to growth mode, there's still a gap, and it widens a lot when you go to the unicorn level, right? So that's the part that in Japan, we still need to attract the investment, particularly global, because the size of that investment requires global investment, to come to the ecosystem. It is coming, and that's the good news, but it's still there is a potential to shorten it and attract more of that global investment. Now, when it comes into support infrastructure, and on that we look at accelerators in this chart. What we saw in 2019 is that in Japan, you didn't have many of the global accelerators. And accelerators are important because they provide mentorship, but also provide networks. And it's an important growth tool for the early stage startups to start becoming sound for investment. And the global accelerators usually turn out returns of startups of 100 million valuation or 1 billion valuation in their pipeline. But none of them were here in Japan except Plug and Play that was starting in 2019. What we're seeing now is that this map of results is starting to change, and we are seeing 500 startups or tech startups, for instance, coming to Japan. So what we expect is to start aligning more with the blue part of the graph, which is the global returns of these accelerators, and start seeing them in the orange part, in the Japan part. And this is a trend that is ongoing right now. Now, the other aspect of support of startups is the mentorship. And on that, we look at angels and angel networks. And the reason for that is because the angels are the best mentors you can have. They invest on you, so they have an interest in supporting you and helping you getting the success or connecting with the right investors or giving you the right advice. Now, when it comes to Tokyo, you have not many angel networks yet. And you don't have many mentors network yet. And you can see the difference between New York ecosystem and Tokyo, right, in terms of those networks of angels. Now, we don't see in Japan also those mafia effects. And let me explain what mafia effects are. We call that when you have a very successful startup, for instance, a unicorn, like Uber, and then the founder and the first employees, the first wave of employees have a lot of money because of the stock options, and then they become angels or they become serial entrepreneurs, and then they develop other startups. So we call that, for instance, the Uber mafia or the PayPal mafia, when you have like 50, 100 startups that were grown out of the success of a unicorn, right? We are not seeing that too much in Tokyo. You have some, for instance, with Mercari and the founders going as an angels, but it's not growing the same potential. And there are reasons for that. Part of it is because of the stock option regulation and use of that. But the government is working on changing that. So we expect that to start changing. And we expect that to start having more mafia effects as the startups in Japan grow and succeed, especially the deep tech ones. Then when we look at university startups, we see that they are producing startups, but they have a lot of potential to grow when we compare internationally. And let me explain this graph a little bit. What you see in the horizontal axis is the numbers of startups produced by the alumni of each of the universities. In the vertical one is the number of unicorns produced by alumni of those universities. And the size of the bubble is the total amount of funding that the startups that were alumni of that university grow. You can see that Keio and Tokyo were the largest one in Japan, but still there are large differentials with others. And there is no reason for that large differential to happen. The quality of the university is extremely good, and the output in science and technology and research is extremely good, and among the best in the world, as you saw in the cluster WIPO statistics. So this is the translation issue that Marc was referring into, and this is the potential that we are starting to see also changing as the universities work more on the entrepreneurial education and the translation issues that they have. And that is interesting because the data, if you look at university startups in Japan, Tokyo is kind of the pillar of those university startups. And 3 universities in particular, Tokyo University, Keio, and Tsukuba, produce around, I think it's like 30 to 40% of all the university startups that are starting to be developed in Japan. And these are startups produced in universities that get funded by VCs or startup funding that we can get into the statistics. And that was data collected by ENISA. So you can see Tokyo being one of the strong pillars of this science and technology foundation of Japan ecosystem. And we hope that it continues evolving and growing deeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, so before going to discussion part, so is there, Marc, so is there any supplementary comment or questions to Victor's slide?
No, I mean, I agree with literally all of the slides and all of the statistics that I've seen just now. I mean, it just confirmed again that all the ingredients are in place. And now what we need to build on top of that is a connective, collaborative layer that basically makes sure that all of the community rows in the right direction of commercializing all the amazing innovation and builds amazing products and services that the global market needs. So yeah, thank you, Victor, for shining a light to where Tokyo stands essentially. Very interesting.
Okay. Thank you. This is like a whole summary of this discussion, but yeah, we would like to discuss more precisely about what we can do to evolve the startup ecosystem in Tokyo. So the first topic I would like to discuss about this discussion is where is the potential and the challenge of life science startup ecosystem in Tokyo. I think that especially so there, as Marc mentioned in his slide, I think there is a gap between the capability of science and technology in Tokyo, and also in Tokyo, the stakeholders are not good at transfer the academic knowledge to business. So is there any solution or the point we have to consider to change that situation?
I mean, what I've seen and what I've heard also from meeting with people in the community is that all of the things that we need to be doing, we're doing them right now, and we need to acknowledge that some of these things are hard problems to solve and it takes time, right? But we are working on entrepreneurial education. We are working to create entrepreneurship or position entrepreneurship as a viable career path within the research community. We're doing all of that, and it takes time. What I'd like to mention is that for those that would be entrepreneurs, those that have amazing ideas, amazing research results, I think it's important to bring role models into their immediate community and show them that others have been there, done that, and can succeed in doing so. And it's quite amazing to see, we try to quantify this. It's a concept we call local connectedness, that those that actually make the leap and build a company, those that are connected to a community of mentors, investors, advisors, tend to grow their company much faster than those that are not plugged into the local ecosystem. And this is what I mean with the collaborative, community-driven layer that we need to build on top of the infrastructure that we already see in Tokyo today.
Yeah, thank you so much. But I think the point is, so how can we find the proper collaborator or supporter to grow the entrepreneurs properly? I think that now there are many people, especially young people, interested in the startups, and they are really entrepreneurial. But if there's not enough or suitable ecosystem is there, so I think that they might be so fail. And this is might be our Japanese people's. Japanese people tend to fear about the failure. So how we can change that situation is a big question, I think. Is there any suggestions from Victor?
Well, I just want to echo what Marc was saying, because I think he's right on everything he said, and in the sense that it's also applicable to Tokyo. And it's important to know that this translation problem is not an easy one. I mean, it happens everywhere. The example of Stanford, of MIT, those are not normal examples. I mean, those are anomalies in the good way. Those are kind of miracles, and then they learn how to nurture that and maintain it. So that's something many regions in the world are struggling with, and not only here. So first thing is, it's not an easy problem to solve. It's complicated, but it's solvable. That's the good reason. And I think programs like the one you presented of Blockbuster are very good ones, just to try to bring that. What we are seeing now is universities, they really are caring about this and focusing on this. There are incentives problems in the translation offices. We know that in terms of how the officials should look into quality of patents and not only quantity, for instance, but those are being looking into. And there are programs from the government that are looking also into how to help researchers, regardless of the university or the hierarchical structure or the incentives that are in the universities. While this change, that will take time, because changing that, for instance, you think about universities like Berkeley or MIT, it took time for changing that. It may take like 5 to 10 years, and in the meantime, you just have some professors. But there are professors that are ready now and going, so you need facilities where they can get out of that and do their research and collaborate that research. So initiatives like the Global Campus that the Cabinet Office is doing now, I think goes into that direction to try to form those neutral entities that can support that research. And I think the other area we are lacking is shared labs, where you have shared labs where these people, entrepreneurs, can go there and have mentors and support, like a CIC right now that we have started a campus, but for deep tech companies. I think that's also something we are missing. We don't have that in Tokyo. But I know it will come. It seems the ecosystem is allowing that to come. So I think you have many of the ingredients starting to come. And the rest is a question of developing more of those role models that Marc was talking about. But we are starting to have them, right? Like Pepco, Pet Dream founder was just got the Wolf Award like last month, right? That's a very prestigious one. But he's actually one of the successful entrepreneurs. He's a scientist, and it's also recognized establishment of the university, and it's also a mentor. So how can we grow that? It's a question of time and these tools, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, for introducing the change what is happening now in Tokyo. And so, Marc, so is there any good model case or in the worldwide or other cities which can change the situation, start ecosystem situation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just quickly adding that, I'm from Germany, for example. I advise the largest scientific organization in Germany, and we're seeing the exact same problems we're seeing here. There are other cases that I've been in touch with due to the work with Helmholtz Association in Germany, which is, for example, what Oxford University is doing, and also what's been pioneered perhaps by Stanford University, the human-centered design, and basically a way of looking at research and innovation to really have the end user in mind and try to build products and services that serve a higher purpose and actually do solve a problem. I feel like sometimes, at least that's what I'm observing in Germany, it'd be interesting to hear what it's like here in Tokyo and in Japan, is that we're so deep into the trenches of our own intellectual curiosity and the research that we're doing that we sometimes tend to miss the bigger picture of how we can contribute to solving some of the world's most challenging issues that we're finding ourselves in. And having some sort of layer on top of the researchers where you help them understand what applicability their products or what applicability their research may have, and taking them through a human-centered design process might oftentimes lead to outcomes that they wouldn't see themselves otherwise. And I think it's something that we can definitely look at introducing here at Tokyo University and others. I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think, is there any comment from Victor?
I think he's touching on a very important topic, which is how do we take the researchers that are thinking about research and their only focus is the publication of the patent, that's a passion, into being entrepreneurs. The answer is you cannot do that with everyone. That's number one. So the second answer is how can you free that intellectual knowledge in a way that can be then taken by entrepreneurs? That's one of the questions. And there are mechanisms for that. And the second one is those professors that really have the back of entrepreneurial, how do you help them becoming that without losing their career? And I think those are the two problems that we need to focus on, and the universities are starting to focus on. Some of them, we can work them with external layers, as Marc was saying. Some of them has to be internal. So it's a comprehensive action plan, and I think the work is ongoing, but sometimes it takes time, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. It takes time to make the change happen, and also I think as we also mentioned before, so I think the problem is so multidimensional, and there are so many stakeholders who should work on this problem. So next, my question is, who is the key stakeholder to change this situation, do you think? I think that there are so many key stakeholders, and also, but one of them or some of them have to take initiative to change the situation. So is there any suggestion from your Victor's study or Marc's study in startup Genome?
I think you want to look at the ecosystem or the stakeholders around the entrepreneur, right? Those that actually make the leap to build a company. I think especially in an ecosystem that is emerging, deep tech in Tokyo, you need to find mentors, those people that can actually really not only mentor the student or the entrepreneur on how to build the company, but also become the business network for the entrepreneur, right? Oftentimes what we find is that researchers, they don't know how to run a business. They have never looked into legal matters, but they also don't have a business network in order to actively solve the product, sell the product that they're developing, right? And then it becomes extremely hard to impossible to position something that they've built. So I think the mentors and the investors, for example, really supporting the entrepreneurs in this critical part of the journey, introducing them to the right investors, introducing them to the right potential customers in order for them to continue to make progress with the product that they're building is very essential, right in the first circle around the entrepreneur, I would say.
So just to add on that, I think from the research that I led at the World Bank, what we saw is globally the ones that really have an impact on the ecosystem, because there's so many, right? And getting more startups to get success in funding are those mentors and those networks of mentors. Now that is a little bit intangible, right? Mentors, okay, yeah, but how do you put them together? So the second thing we look at that research is what we call, and that's from Brookings Institute, networking assets. And that's a collection of different entities, different purposes. What their goal is to generate those networks of mentors, so they are available for the entrepreneurs. And they become like really game changers of the ecosystem. And those can be accelerators, because they have that, but those are closed networks, so you need many of them. Or can be more neutral, and those are usually later in ecosystems, are startup campuses. So for instance, when you look at Paris, Station F was that kind of big connector on doing that. In Berlin, the factory, Berlin did part of that at the beginning, and it amalgamated many of those accelerators and VCs with those networks into that. So that make a change. Some of those are led by government. Some of those are powered by universities. So CIC, for instance, in Boston, and kudos for that, was MIT making that campus an MIT initiative to create CIC with MIT alumni. And that became one of the centers of the deep tech of campus and Kendall Square. I grow Kendall Square. You see a huge difference there. So those are things that move the needle. Now for deep tech, you also need those labs facilities, because it's not only the mentorship, it's how do you access that equipment that is so difficult to access and connect with the right staff. So it's an additional complication. So you need a physical layer beyond the networks that is happening, and a concentration. And those actors usually are those networking assets, and we can look into that.
Yeah, thank
Maybe
you.
just to add one comment to that, building on what you were saying, what we've seen in several ecosystems really work well is that there's at least one organization that has the mandate to support the ecosystem in all its different facets, and really is measuring its success, its KPIs on, are we moving the needle for the ecosystem, not for any specific organization or individual, but are we supporting the ecosystem grow faster? And this is true for deep tech and for software. Really, across the board, you need those people, those individuals, or an organization that could be led by government or a quasi-government organization, really continuing to try to understand what are the key gaps that we're facing, and what are some of the mechanisms with which we can solve them, right? What are the activities that are missing so that we can jumpstart those, and what are those that are really successful in the ecosystem so that we can make them even more successful by routing more funding, more budget, more resources into those activities.
Yeah, and sorry, yes, I'm adding but I want just to echo one part that I think for Japan is very important when you mentioned about the government. I think the government role in Japan and Tokyo Metropolitan Government or the national government, or the ones we see in the regions and Kansai, Fukuoka, it's important here because it signals all the stakeholders a direction. So they have a software. It's not a leading role, if you want. It's a backer's role, but it kind of pushes from behind. So I think for Japan, you need that leading role, that concentration, together with a backer's role. And that's what we're seeing now, and that's the exciting part. But I want just to kind of think the dynamics we are seeing in Japan and how everything is moving.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think that I totally agree about so Mark, as Mark mentioned, so we definitely need business mentors, to startups. And sometimes we are discussing with our stakeholders or some government people. So definitely we need some mentors to startups to grow up efficiently. But our next question is who can be a mentor for the startups, and where are they? Because especially in the life science area, so the market is not only in Japan, but also the startups should be so expand their business to global. That means a person who don't know well about the global market or don't have a connection with the global pharmaceutical companies or global venture capital is not proper for the startup growth. So so I would like to have some suggestions from Mark to how can we find or maybe grow the business mentor in Japan.
It's an interesting question, and it makes me think of smaller ecosystems and their ability to go global versus medium-sized economies and their inability to go global, right? If you compare Swedish or Israeli entrepreneurs and companies, they go global at a much higher rate and grow much faster. If you compare it to Germany or Japan, we tend to think that our domestic market is big enough, so we build local and we go local. But then afterwards, we lack the trajectory and we lack the global applicability of our products and services so that we cannot go global afterwards. So really, the first learning for me would be build a business not necessarily only for the Japanese market, but really from day one try to figure out to speak with mentors outside of the ecosystem, with corporates outside of the ecosystem, so that you row in the right direction on that front. And then in ecosystems, what we oftentimes find, as you mentioned, there is not enough mentors, right? So how do you find the right people to support, and where should they be located? Especially if you look into a growth phase company, right? We're seeing that the proportion of those in the ecosystem that can help you becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And the only way to fix this is to find mentors outside of the ecosystem. right? And it does make perfect sense for a company that's eventually aiming to sell to US customers to recruit mentors that are located in the target market they're selling to, right? So finding an infrastructure, and this is where government perhaps could help facilitate and create a layer that startups can tap into, where local entrepreneurs can maybe identify mentors, be it Japanese mentors or other nationals that are located in the target market, oftentimes the US, where they can basically get the experience that they especially need, and at a later stage it becomes more and more important even, right? But that's one direct way of solving that problem, I would think.
Yeah, thank you.
So I totally agree. And one of the things we saw is mentors, the important thing is that they have to have experience in actually the business or the subject you are going into. So if you want to go global, they have to have experience in having done that. You want to look at a patent that you do, it has to be someone that knows how this patent will be commercialized and that is viable for it. If not, they will not be good mentors. And if you want to grow a company to global scale, they have to have experience having done that. And that means they have the networks and they have the knowledge. So in every stage, I think there are different mentors. And the question is, how do you find those mentors? And who can help you finding those mentors? And traditionally, accelerators and VCs can do that. And they do that because they invest in you and they use their networks to support those. But before that, where you have it at a very early stage, especially with deep tech and the patent issues, and I think that's a layer we are missing in Japan. And I think the blockbuster network you're doing on LinkedIn could be elements of that, but we don't have that yet. And I think the universities don't have that in the translation officers right now. So I think that might be one of the issues that we lack of, and getting these communities of entrepreneurs like-minded that also bring these accelerators and these VCs that are interested on bringing those mentors to have a larger pipeline would be a solution. Now, when you go to growth stages like unicorns, yeah, we are lacking that part, and I think that's where we need global investors of the size that is larger. You saw the gap is very big, which means we don't have so many. So when we want to go there, we don't have managers or mentors that will help us yet in Tokyo.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with your idea to building some supporting network asset to the early stage entrepreneurs, which support their global expansion or business network to make it possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think time is already up. So we would like to close this session with some short brief comment from Marc and Victor. So Marc, please have some comment to encourage encourage stakeholders in startup ecosystem.
Yeah, so from my point of view, really, I've been looking into and directly working with over 100 startup ecosystems over the last couple of years, and I can safely say that Tokyo is on an amazing path to success. I can see it across the board by speaking to people, by looking into the metrics, looking at policy and program changes that were affected during the last couple of months and years. So all I can say is I really can't wait to see what's going to come out of it in the next couple of years and hope to be a part of the journey.
Thank you. Okay, so Victor.
Oh, I just totally agree with Marc, and I think that you saw in the presentation the growth of Tokyo ecosystem is in fundamentals, and it's in fundamentals of deep tech. So the ingredients are there. We're starting to see very good fruits of those ingredients. There are companies that are like 20 to 40 million valuation that are deep tech, that are bio, that are robotics, that are fusion energy, and so on. And those are the biggest success that you are starting to happen. So the shift in the ecosystem into the fundamentals is happening. The investment is coming, as you were saying. International investment is coming. So I think we are at the beginning of the ecosystem to start growing exponentially. And we've seen that in many ecosystems around the world. We were just talking about that. The feeling is all the things have been put in place. We just need the alignment of all the stakeholders to grow and to come to the party. But it's happening. So I look forward to this development and see the ecosystem like blooming and becoming one of the largest ones in deep tech in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so time is up. So thank you for everyone coming to this session in this morning. And so we would like to close this session with. I would like to close this session with giving big applause to Marc and Victor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.